continue with our afternoon keynote addresses. We heard earlier today about the challenges of providing cybersecurity in a world where we are connected and more mobile than ever. I mean, the car is a great example. Our next speaker is going to tackle the question, does big data hold the key to a better defense? Please help me welcome to the stage the Director of Cybersecurity Policy in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa for Microsoft, Mr. Jan Neutzer. Have fun.
Hey, thank you.
Sir.
Thanks, Brent. Excellent. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a true pleasure to be here. I will talk to you about 4 things this afternoon. I'd like to take a short trip down memory lane, trying to remind ourselves what cyberspace and cybersecurity looked like back in the earlier part of the last decade, and then take a view forward toward the year 2020 and look at some key trends in cybersecurity, and then place it in the context of 3 large technology trends that really have been dominating this year's CeBIT, and that is the shift to cloud, the Internet of Things, and big data. And I will come at this from a security perspective, so that might vary a little bit from what you've heard during the course of the day today. So let's start with looking back to the year 2005. So my team in Redmond did some research trying to visualize what cyberspace looked like in the year 2005. And so what you see in terms of the size of the boxes behind me are the number of users in each country depicted. And the shading of the color green represents the percentage of internet penetration for each of these geographies. So the darker the green, the higher the penetration rate. So in 2005, if we take that as a baseline, cyberspace had about 1 billion users. 200 million of those located in the US. China just started to come online with about 100 million. And Nigeria, which I want to pick for as an interesting case study, had about 5 million, barely visible on this map. And so what did the ecosystem look like at the time? There was a lot of discussion about the acceleration of broadband. We needed to get folks connected. Windows XP was the dominating operating system at the time, and Facebook had about 1 million users. On the threat side, we had just come through a couple of years of really devastating worms and sophisticated viruses. Some of you might remember these worms called Blaster and Slammer. Slammer, actually particularly interesting, was a worm that duplicated every 8.5 seconds of its existence, and it infected machines globally, all of its targets, within about 15 minutes. And so that happened slightly before 2005, but I'm referencing that here because it was a true wake-up call, I think, for our industry and for Microsoft in particular, as we started to recognize the need to really boost our investments in security. And so we started on the response side, really, to invest majorly in secure development, pioneering the security development lifecycle, the SDL, which has since been emulated by many others and is an industry-leading standard. And we started to talk about threat mitigation in terms of defense in depth, this concept that it became clear that it was no longer sufficient to have one defensive measure, having a firewall or particular measures, but you needed to layer those defenses. And that's really something that we started to see 2005 going forward. So let's skip to 2010. 2010, cyberspace, the users in cyberspace have doubled. It took about 35, 40 years to get the first billion users online, took 5 years to get the second billion users. And so you see clear changes here in terms of how cyberspace is constructed. The global south and the BRIC countries coming online very strong. And the trends we're seeing to emerge is really about always on and mobile being front and center. Social media exploding. Facebook at the beginning of 2010 had about 400 million users. From 1 million, 2005, 400 million 5 years later. At the end of 2010, they were at 600 million users. And on the threat side, we started to see, many of you will recall this, a number of rather prominent data breaches. And attackers really moved and shifted from seeking notoriety as they had in the past to actually making money with what they're doing. Botnets became such a significant threat that we at Microsoft started to think, how can we start mitigating this threat? And we started engaging in these botnet takedowns. We actually pioneered this by using a very inventive legal approach, suing botnet herders in civilian court in the United States to take over the infrastructure, redirect traffic, and then subsequently help clean up those infected machines. Since 2010, we've actually had about 8 botnet takedowns, about 2 a year, roughly, and we've encouraged others to partner with us on this. And so this whole notion of organized crime, data breaches on the response side led to not only technical solutions, but I think in 2010 and going forward, there was an emerging realization that technical solutions really weren't enough, and you needed to combine those with more effective policy responses. And so cybersecurity policy was something that really moved from sort of a niche issue over here toward becoming much more of a front and center issue in the national security and international security debates. So let's fast forward to 2020. And again, you see how the map is changing. Now, this is a prediction, but we're fairly confident that our data is accurate. And so what you're seeing here is, again, a doubling of the global internet population, from 2 billion users 2010 to just above 4 billion in 2020. Just an astonishing pace of growth. And this is really in the day and age of what we're talking about. The Internet of Things really becomes the Internet of everything. At the same time, and maybe just to follow up on a few numbers, at this point, users from China and India alone in 2020 will have easily surpassed users in the developed world. And it's important, I think, to remember that these users will be quite a bit different from the users that started coming online in the earlier part of the 2000s. These users will be more mobile, they'll be younger, they'll spend more time online, and they're really perceiving the web much more through social media, through apps, and in many ways also through natural interfaces and robotics and other things that we're talking about. So huge changes there on the horizon. And so at the same time, we're moving in a situation where we're no longer just worried about cyber criminals, your average cyber criminal that I just talked about on the last slide. One of the things that we've really seen is that we're moving to a world with many attackers that have many motives. And among those, clearly, are governments. If the last 9 months have taught us anything, it is that the role of governments in cyberspace has shifted. I think we're all familiar with the roles of government in cyberspace as a user. Governments are users, just like all of us. They provide e-services to their citizens. And governments have traditionally been protectors of cyberspace through regulation and other means. But I think it's becoming very evident that governments are also exploiters in cyberspace. And that, again, leads to the point that on the one hand, we're going to have to, and as an industry, we are thinking very hard about how can we protect our users on the technical side, and we're doing a number of things on encryption that I'll get to a little bit later. But I do want to use this opportunity to really point out that we do need a much more robust dialogue on the policy side. I used to work at the United Nations in New York, and I can tell you with certainty that that dialogue at the moment is not happening at a pace that is necessary and required, really. So what we need is a global dialogue around what we call cybersecurity norms of behavior in cyberspace. The Chancellor actually yesterday at the CeBIT opening referred to this, and I'm very pleased to see that this is something that the German government has embraced. And so let's hope that we'll have a stronger dialogue in this space moving forward. And so if I were to depict how the web has changed in sort of just two simple pictures, and I find this actually interesting. Back in the early days of the web, this is kind of how I would depict the web. Sort of a web of documents with users at the core. If we look at the web today, part of the reason why our experiences are so much richer is because this web has become a web of machines and users and applications, and everything is sort of interconnected, sometimes in non-obvious ways. The challenge here is that all of these fantastic qualities and attributes really can be used for good or for bad. They can be innocuous and they can be dangerous. And this is, I think, how cybersecurity has, in a simple sort of graphic way, we can understand how it's evolved. And so I'd like to place this in the context of the three trends, the three large-scale technology trends that I mentioned. And so for one, there's scale, and scale comes with the cloud. Secondly, it's the ubiquity of cyberspace, and that is through the Internet of Things, or as we call it in Germany sometimes here, Industry 4.0. And then there's the complexity of cyberspace, and I think that relates to the implications of big data. And I think we have people, policy, and technology changes that are coming with each of these. So let's start by looking at the cloud. And I'd like to start with just throwing out a few numbers here. For one thing, the cloud is actually growing at a rate much faster than any of us had anticipated. Some of the stats that I find really interesting: in 2008, the cloud market globally was estimated at about $48 billion. Earlier this year, that was revised to about $150 billion. So just an incredible change there. And the economies of scale that come with cloud and the opportunities that come with cloud, I think, are undeniable. However, it is also clear that if we want to truly leverage the benefits of cloud, we need to have a serious and sustained policy discussion that can enshrine and guide us as we begin to leverage and maximize the benefits of cloud. And so we're moving to a world where 70% of data is created by people, but 80% of that data is stored by enterprises. Just tectonic shifts. And if you just remember for a moment that 90% of the data that exists today has only been created in the last 2 years. It's just a phenomenal growth of data and of cloud services. At the same time, it's important to recall that 1/3 of all that data will have at some point either passed through the cloud or will live in the cloud. 1/3 of all this data. And so we can't just talk about the opportunity for cloud. We need to be aware of the risks and the challenges. And so I want to spend just a moment to talk about what we at Microsoft are doing when it comes to protecting our customers using the cloud. And so last December, in response to some of the very serious allegations about government surveillance, we announced a series of measures, encryption among them. And just to be clear, we've been using encryption for a long time at Microsoft, but we're expanding our use of encryption, and we're expanding it in the following ways. Number one, we're encrypting data in transit between our users and the services we offer. Two, we're encrypting data in transit between our data centers. Three, we're encrypting data at rest. And four, we're encrypting end-to-end communications between users. In addition, we recently published a cloud security readiness tool, which I find personally quite helpful, actually. That tool is a free tool. It's available online. I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's meant to help organizations evaluate their IT maturity, and it's based on the CCM metrics, the cloud control metrics that were developed by the Cloud Security Alliance. And so, again, I would encourage you to take a look at this. It's a very useful tool. Those are just a couple of the examples of what we're doing when it comes to cloud security. And so moving onward toward the second big shift, and it's been discussed a lot today here at CeBIT, the Internet of Things. And so what I wanted to do, again, just give you a few facts and figures, and then place maybe a framework and give some context around how we look at the Internet of Things. Gartner actually has some very interesting predictions. They're not always right, but they have some sometimes fascinating predictions. Gartner predicts that the economic value add of the Internet of Things between now and 2020 is about $1.9 trillion globally across sectors. Just a phenomenal number, $1.9 trillion. And one of the things that is just interesting within looking at the growth of IoT, laptops, smartphones, tablets are expected to grow to about 7.3 billion connected devices by 2020. The growth rate for the Internet of Things is much bigger than that. By 2020, we expect there to be 26 billion connected devices. 26 billion. And so that's, just looking at that scale, that can sometimes be a bit overwhelming. And so helping us to maybe place this in a framework, I thought breaking it down in sort of a two-bucket approach could be helpful. To me, Internet of Things, firstly, really is personal. It's personal in the sense that we are going to move to a world where you're going to end up with so many devices that are connected, that generate data. We had examples of wearable health devices earlier today. Your home electronics are going to be connected in ways never before. You're going to have your fridge talk to your toaster, and it's just a fascinating environment. At the same time, there are a lot of unanswered questions when it comes to the security side of things. And so, in many ways, secure development really becomes a question. I alluded to the fact that commercial software, generally speaking, has undergone this transition through implementing measures for secure development. When you have 26 billion connected devices, it's not entirely clear that you're going to see the same standards of security being applied across the board. So it's something for us to be mindful of. At the same time, and this is sort of the second bucket, IoT really is about the enterprise. And in the enterprise, it's about process optimization and just much more autonomous systems. And with autonomous systems, then comes the question, all this data that's generated, who owns that data? And how is that data controlled? Many of those questions really aren't fully resolved. And then thirdly, response. What happens when somebody attacks your refrigerator? Who's going to patch your fridge? Who's responsible for that? Is it the energy company that runs your smart grid? Is it the software company that provides the embedded software? Is it the manufacturer of the device? We're going to have to look at and think about new models of collaboration that simply don't exist today. And so just to give you an example, I know we just talked a lot about cars, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But it is interesting when you think about what this expanded attack surface actually looks like. So meet your new computer. It is conceivable and likely that cyber criminals will find a way, instead of attacking commercial systems that have become much better protected, they will simply go for either the hardware or the firmware or the embedded software within these devices. And again, we need to think about how we can conceive and protect this greatly expanded and very target-rich attack surface. And so moving on to big data, just a topic that I think is not only dominating this week, but it is a fascinating one, including from a security perspective. So Microsoft commissioned a report recently on big and open data in Europe. Development opportunity or development chance or lost opportunity is the correct title. I encourage you to take a look at it. Let me give you a snapshot from this report. Big data is an incredible opportunity for us here in Europe. But in order for us to leverage big data effectively, one of the things that has become very evident is that we need to enshrine this in a framework of policies that can actually help us do so. And so if we get to a point where that actually becomes the case, big data, for the research that we've been doing, promises an economic value add in Europe of about 206 billion euros through 2020. That's about 2% of GDP. I think those are some very serious numbers. Other interesting facts about big data, just give you this overview here, and I just really find this interesting. 90% of the data created, and I mentioned this, has been created in the last 2 years, but along with that, the cost of storage of this data, and this is part of why we're seeing this incredible revolution, has dropped. If you look at the cost of 5 gigabyte of storage in 1980, it was $5 million. In 2010, that same storage cost 50 cents. Just to give you an idea of how we got to where we are. But with big data come security challenges, just as with the other trends that I've alluded to. And so, from our perspective, fundamental to actually being able to leverage big data are these 4 things here that I'm pointing out. One is data policies, and I think we really are just at the very beginning of this. That includes policies around data protection, around data use. We need to get to a point where we have answers, and answers not just for one country in Europe, but really harmonized answers of who owns a piece of data? What is fair use? What rights are attached to a particular data set? Those are difficult questions, and we need to get to some effective answers, and we need to get there quickly. In addition, organizations need to think about these other things, such as technology and techniques. Organizations will need to deploy new technologies that relate to storage, that will facilitate secure storage in ways that we haven't fully explored. Similarly, we're moving to a situation where new analysis becomes possible, and to actually do that analysis, you need organizational change, and you need to put in place the talent that can do that. It's not evident to me that we actually have that talent and those capabilities in place today. And then finally, the questions of data access need to be clarified, in particular when it comes to third-party data access. And so let me finish with maybe just a thought from a Microsoft perspective. So we've been at security since the famous memo that Bill Gates sent around establishing our Trustworthy Computing organization in 2002. So that's been well over 12 years. And I can tell you, security really isn't something that comes to you overnight. It's not something that occurs because somebody says, now we're going to do security. Security is a process, and it's a journey, and it takes time, and it takes sustained investment. And so at Microsoft, we have a tremendous set of experience when it comes to both security and privacy and also reliability, and we're very confident that we can apply that experience to these new, very large looming technology trends of cloud, of Internet of Things, and of big data. But at the end of the day, it really isn't about just one company doing something in this regard. I think what we need is a concerted effort, really a concerted effort among industry, governments, and users to really demand security and implement security. And so, if we are able to do that, if we are able to bring together those 3 key actors, I think we can get to a point where we can move from where we are today with this concept of datability being a vision to actually making that a reality. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity of talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, we're finished a little bit earlier, so we're going to take a break for about 10